Sandra Ivanov was on her knees in the long gallery before the house had fully woken, scrubbing dried mud from the parquet with a raw bristled brush that raised splinters in her palm. Dawn made the windows milk pale. What little warmth there was came from effort. She had tied her sleeves above the elbow to keep them from the dirty water, and loose dark strands had escaped the knot at her nape. When she leaned back to breathe, she saw her reflection in the polished floor in broken pieces, long face, solemn mouth, eyes too large for comfort. Lady Whitcomb's voice arrived before Lady Whitcomb did, sharp, carrying, and aimed as carefully as a whip crack. "Mind your boots, gentlemen. Plain girls must earn their keep somehow." 2 footmen near the stairs chuckled dutifully. Sandra did not look up. She had learned that if she kept her expression empty, remarks passed over her, with less sport for anyone. The brush rasped. Mud lifted in dark streaks. Her knees burned through the thin fabric of her skirt. She counted strokes under her breath in French, the way her father had once taught her multiplication tables at a writing desk that no longer stood in the schoolroom. 112. 113. When her father had lived, she had done accounts at his side, copied correspondence, and read from his shelves in English and French, and the halting Russian her mother spoke when she laughed. He had said her mind was orderly and her memory exact. He had promised, too casually, as if all futures were trustworthy, that she should never be beholden to anyone's caprice. Then fever had taken him in 8 days. Solicitors came. Inventories followed. Lady Whitcomb, his widowed cousin by marriage and nearest relation in residence, took command with tearful efficiency and a ledger no one else was invited to inspect. Within a season, Sandra had gone from daughter of the house to dependent in it. No pin money, no maid, no invitations save those requiring extra hands. She did not cry when Lady Whitcomb reassigned her mother's former room to a trembling white lapdog with ribbons at its ears, declaring that such a sunny chamber ought not to be wasted on gloom. Sandra carried her own trunk to a narrow space near the linen press, where starch dust settled over everything and the wall sweated in rain. One tear had escaped as she folded the last of her mother's shawls. She wiped it with the back of her wrist and stood up before anyone could call it weakness. Silence, she had discovered, could be armour, if worn daily. By the time breakfast trays had gone up and the butler's steps had quieted, Sandra had finished the gallery floor and moved on to brasswork. No one thanked her. That was ordinary. What was less ordinary was the urgency in the household that morning. Doors opening and closing, the steward called twice, Lady Whitcomb dictating in her morning room with the blinds half drawn, though the sky was clear. From the landing she heard a line that stiffened her spine. "Must be discreetly managed. My son cannot be exposed again, do you understand?" The response was too low to catch. Sandra bent over the banister spindle she was polishing and listened despite herself. "Collections are for display, not sentiment," Lady Whitcomb said next, crisp as cut glass. "A few canvases gone unnoticed, and the notes are covered. He is young. Young men are foolish." Young men, Sandra thought, did not usually gamble away sums that required old masters to rescue them. But Sir Julian Whitcomb had been young for 6 years running, and each year seemed to cost more than the last. At noon, she was sent to air linen in the west corridor, and then summoned back almost immediately by Mrs. Greeley, the housekeeper, whose mouth had gone pinched with anxiety. "You are to wash and make yourself decent," Mrs. Greeley said. "His Grace the Duke of Norwood is expected within the hour. Lady Whitcomb requires additional hands in the gallery." Sandra stared, sure she had misheard. "The Duke? Here? So I am informed, and mind you hold your tongue unless addressed. Lady Whitcomb will not have mistakes." The name was known everywhere. Lord Norwood, one of those men country newspapers described with awe and fear in the same sentence. A duke with faultless taste, faultless collections, and manners so cold people mistook restraint for contempt. He acquired paintings the way generals took cities, methodically, at high price, and without sentimental conversation. Sandra had seen his name in catalogues her father once treasured. She had never imagined him crossing their threshold. She changed into her least faded dark gown and pinned her collar with plain stitches where lace had worn through. When she passed the small mirror by the servants' stairs, she paused only long enough to smooth the stern line of her mouth. Her face, pale and narrow, had never been pretty in the cheerful way ladies preferred. In bright light, people called it severe. In candlelight, when stillness softened edges, strangers sometimes looked at her twice, as if trying to place a figure they had seen before in church glass or old paint. By 3 o'clock, the long gallery had transformed from neglected thoroughfare to staged respectability. Dust sheets were off, damask curtains tied back. 4 paintings, recently brought up from storage, stood against the far wall awaiting inspection. Lady Whitcomb stood among them in pearl silk, one hand resting on a chair as if she had merely happened to be surrounded by inherited beauty. Sir Julian lounged nearby with the restless smile of a man pretending boredom because he could not bear uncertainty. Sandra was stationed discreetly behind and to the left, candelabrum in hand, though daylight still held, instructed to move when signalled and otherwise behave like furniture. The Duke arrived with no flourish beyond precision. Tall, impeccably dressed, his coat cut so cleanly it seemed severe by design, he entered with his solicitor and one quiet valet carrying a leather portfolio. His face gave little away. Controlled, pale from city life, eyes the cool grey of steel before rain. He bowed to Lady Whitcomb exactly as courtesy required, and not a degree more. "Your ladyship! Your grace, you honour us!" "Let us hope I justify the journey," he said, and the faint dryness in his tone made Sir Julian's smile flicker. He moved to the first painting while Lady Whitcomb praised provenance with practised ease. Norwood listened, asked 2 short questions that exposed a date inconsistency, and moved on. At the second, he requested the canvas be tilted to catch light over craquelure. At the third, he said merely, "School of not by." Sandra kept her eyes lowered and her hand steady on the candelabrum. Yet, as they approached the 4th painting, partly obscured by a torn Flemish tapestry that had slipped from its tack, something in her chest tightened before she understood why. Norwood paused. "And this?" Lady Whitcomb's voice was brisk. "A trifle, continental imitation. Damaged and of no consequence. I included it only to fill the set." "Remove the tapestry," Norwood said. A footman fumbled at the cloth and let it drop. Sandra forgot to breathe. The portrait was of a young woman in silver satin, turned 3/4 toward the viewer, one hand gloved and resting on a carved chair. The artist had caught that suspended expression some painters managed once in a lifetime, composure over motion, as if laughter had just gone still. Her brows were dark and delicately arched, Sandra's own shape. Her mouth was fuller than Sandra's had ever been, but the eyes, storm grey, ringed in shadow, direct and searching, were her mother's eyes. Not similar, not suggestive, unmistakable. Noise in the room dulled to a distant hum. The candelabrum shook once in Sandra's hand before she steadied it. Lady Whitcomb was saying, "As I said, worthless. The frame is cracked. There is no verified artist. We can crate it with the lot." "Worthless things are rarely so carefully repainted," Norwood murmured, stepping closer. "Old varnish, newer overwork in the background." He reached toward the lower edge of the frame. Sandra saw, beneath grime and darkened shellac, a scratched flourish she knew from her mother's books. EI interlaced in an old continental hand. Her pulse roared. Fear told her to keep silent. Years of training told her silence preserved survival. She heard herself speak anyway. "Your Grace, please!" Every head turned. Lady Whitcomb's colour rose, then blanched. Sandra set down the candelabrum so carefully, no wax spilled. "The canvas is not imitation," she said, and her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "There are initials under the varnish, my mother's maiden initials, and the inscription on the frame is Russian, partly worn, but legible. It reads, 'Elena Ivanov, at 19, in winter light.'" Sir Julian laughed outright. "Good God!" Lady Whitcomb snapped. "How dare you interrupt? You overreach yourself, girl." Sandra kept her eyes on the Duke. "I ask only that it not leave this house unexamined. If I am mistaken, I will say so publicly." For a long beat, Norwood studied her, as if adjusting focus between pigment and person. His expression did not warm, but it sharpened. "You read Russian?" he asked. "Yes, Your Grace." "Fluently?" "Enough to translate labels and correspondence in an archival hand." Lady Whitcomb recovered enough to smile brittly. "A childish hobby, I assure you. Her mother filled her head with foreign nonsense." Norwood did not look away from Sandra. "Who taught you accounts?" "My father." "And cataloguing?" "I assisted him with household inventories and his library register." The Duke inclined his head a fraction, decision settling like a latch. "Then this is no trifle." He turned to his solicitor. "Mr. Hale, note immediate hold on removal pending examination." Lady Whitcomb stepped forward. "Your Grace, surely this is unnecessary. If the girl has been indulged into fantasy—" "Your Ladyship," Norwood said, finally giving her his full gaze, "you invited me to inspect works for sale. I cannot do so if material facts are suppressed, whether by ignorance or haste." The rebuke landed without raised voice, and did more damage for it. Sir Julian muttered something under his breath and retreated to the window. Norwood addressed Sandra again. "You will accompany the painting to Norwood House as temporary cataloguer until provenance is established." Lady Whitcomb stared at him as if struck. "She is a dependent under my care. She may return when the work is complete." His tone remained courteous, impenetrable. "Naturally, she will be compensated." Compensated! The word landed in Sandra's mind like a dropped coin in a deep well. Small sound, impossible depth. Lady Whitcomb's smile had hardened into porcelain. "If your Grace insists." "I do." The interview ended with formal bows and clumsy attempts at recovering ease. Crates were ordered. Men were instructed. The portrait, newly significant, was handled with padded gloves and guarded placement. Sandra stood very still while the room changed around her. When Norwood departed, he paused only once at the threshold and said, without softness and without insult, "Be ready at 9 tomorrow." Then he was gone. The house exhaled in whispers the instant wheels left the drive. By supper, half the servants believed Sandra had bewitched a duke with foreign languages. The other half believed she had blundered into treason. Mrs. Greeley pressed cold bread into her hand in the still room and muttered, "Keep to your room tonight if you've any sense." Even kindness arrived as warning. Lady Whitcomb sent for Sandra at 10. The summons came not to the drawing room, but to the small blue sitting room used for unpleasant business. No fire burned. Lady Whitcomb sat upright, gloves still on, though the hour was late. Sir Julian leaned against the mantel with a glass, eyes bright from drink and resentment. "You have made a spectacle of yourself," Lady Whitcomb began, "and of me." Sandra stood with hands clasped to hide their trembling. "I answered a direct question." "You contradicted me before my own guests." "Before His Grace. Do not be insolent. Sir Julian clicked his tongue. You think this changes anything? A smudged painting and your tragic look? Lady Whitcomb lifted a hand to silence him and fixed Sandra with a gaze honed over years of social correction. Listen carefully. You are maintained here out of family duty. Nothing more. You have no fortune, no name of consequence, and no position except what I permit. If you imagine that muttering about old initials gives you claims upon this house, dismiss it now. Sandra felt anger rise, cold and clarifying. I have imagined nothing. I asked for proper provenance. Lady Whitcomb's mouth tightened. You will go to Norwood House because refusal would be conspicuous. You will perform exactly what is asked and return at once. You will not discuss private family matters. You will certainly not entertain absurd legal notions planted by men who enjoy stirring scandal in houses not their own. So there it was. Fear, barely hidden, not of impropriety, of records. Sandra thought of her father's desk, removed after his death, of sealed boxes sent for sorting, of her mother's letters that vanished one drawer at a time. She thought of the portrait's eyes watching from a darkened frame for years, while everyone called it worthless. If this painting was truly Elena Ivanov, then someone had made sure Elena's name stayed buried. Lady Whitcomb leaned back, voice turning falsely mild. There is also the matter of your future. Mr. Blaine has expressed interest in a sensible arrangement. He is prepared to overlook your plain circumstances, given your dependence. That is generosity. The name struck Sandra like sour smoke. Mr. Blaine, a creditor with yellowed cuffs and a habit of appraising women the way he appraised livestock. She had endured 2 dinners beside him, and one damp-handed attempt at familiarity in the conservatory. Lady Whitcomb had called him practical. No, Sandra said before caution could intervene. Sir Julian laughed into his glass. Hear that? She refuses her market. Lady Whitcomb's eyes flashed. You are not in a position to refuse anything. I am 22, Sandra said, each word set carefully in place. Of legal majority. I will not marry Mr. Blaine. Silence fell so abruptly she heard the clock in the corridor strike the 1/4 hour. Lady Whitcomb stood. Go to your room, pack for 2 days. And remember, girl, society is not kind to women who mistake temporary notice for protection. Sandra curtsied because discipline was habit, turned, and left before her face betrayed what she felt. In the narrow passage by the linen press, she leaned against cool plaster and let herself breathe once, hard, her heart hammered with equal parts dread and fierce, unbelieving hope. Tomorrow she would ride to Norwood House under the Duke's authority. A borrowed shield, perhaps, but a shield none the less. If she failed, Lady Whitcomb would close every door and call it justice. If she succeeded, questions long smothered would have to be answered in ink, not gossip. For years she had survived by making herself small enough to be overlooked. Tonight, for the first time, being overlooked seemed more dangerous than being seen. Tonight, for the first time, being overlooked seemed more dangerous than being seen. She pushed open the door to her narrow room and lit the stub of candle on the washstand. The flame revealed little beyond the iron bed, the trunk with one hinge mended by twine, and the folded shawl she had kept hidden beneath spare chemises because it still smelled faintly, impossibly, of her mother's lavender soap. Pack for 2 days, Lady Whitcomb had said, as if the order were a leash. Sandra knelt by the trunk and began with method, because method steadied panic. 2 gowns, mended cuffs inward, stockings rolled, writing case, her father's small French dictionary with the cracked spine. At the last moment she added the shawl. If this journey ended in humiliation, she wanted one thing that had belonged to love and not to management. A soft knock came. Mrs. Greeley slipped inside without waiting to be invited and shut the door behind her. "You've done a foolish, brave thing," the housekeeper murmured, thrusting a wrapped packet into Sandra's hand. "Bread and cold ham. Kitchen scraps, but better than arriving faint. Eat in the carriage if they don't feed you." Sandra swallowed. "Thank you." Mrs. Greeley's eyes flicked toward the corridor. "Her ladyship has sent a note already. To Mr. Blaine, I'd wager. And one to the vicar's wife, which means by noon tomorrow half the county will hear you have set your cap at a duke." "Let them. That's a dear sentiment from someone with no allies." The older woman's face softened despite the words. "Keep your temper. Keep records if you can. Men believe paper when they won't believe women." Sandra almost laughed at the bitter practicality of it. "I learned that young." Mrs. Greeley touched her sleeve once, briskly. "Then use it." She was gone before Sandra could answer. Sleep came in fragments. Every creak in the corridor sounded like reprisal. At dawn, she dressed in her plainest dark wool, braided her hair tight, and went downstairs with her trunk. No one from the family appeared to see her off. A groom loaded her things as if she were laundry. Norwood's carriage arrived exactly at 9. The Duke was not inside. He had sent his man and written instructions in a clean, slanting hand. "Proceed directly to Norwood House. Miss Ivanoff is to be shown to the East Workroom and provided breakfast. Portrait to be uncrated only in my presence. No flourish, no apology, no invitation to gratitude." It was, Sandra thought, as the carriage rolled away from Whitcomb's gates. The first straightforward arrangement anyone had made with her in years. Norwood House rose from London stone in balanced, unsmiling lines, as if proportion itself had built a fortress and called it taste. Inside, the air held beeswax, coal, and that dry paper scent of old libraries. A butler received her with impersonal precision, neither rude nor warm. "Miss Ivanoff, Her Grace's old morning room has been made ready as a workroom. Mrs. Dalrymple will show you." Her Grace. The title landed gently and then hung in the corridor like something not to be touched. No one said more. Mrs. Dalrymple, Norwood's housekeeper, was silver-haired, upright, and gave Sandra one assessing look that took in hem quality, posture, and hands marked by scrubbing. "You will ring if you require ledgers. You will not enter the West Archive without permission. Meals at 1 and 7 unless His Grace requests otherwise." A beat. "And if anyone asks whether you are kin, you will say you are employed." Employed. The word was both shield and boundary. The East Workroom had north light and a long table already laid with gloves, soft cloths, magnifiers, and a notebook stamped with the Norwood crest. The portrait waited in its crate like a held breath. Norwood arrived 10 minutes later, removed his gloves, and nodded once. "Begin." Together with 2 conservators, he supervised the uncrating. The canvas emerged intact, surface dulled by yellowed varnish but astonishingly alive beneath. Up close, Sandra could see the painter's confidence in the cheek shadows, the quick intelligence in the mouth. Her own hand shook once before she clasped it behind her back. Norwood noticed everything. "You may approach, Miss Ivanoff, not worshipfully, analytically." Colour rose in her face. "Yes, Your Grace." He questioned her without indulgence. "Date range? Late 1790s to early 1800s, likely. Pigments suggest pre-industrial manufacture in the blues. Frame? Original lower rail replaced upper right. Russian carving pattern on the inner lip. Provincial but skilled. Inscription," she bent, reading through grime, "Elena Ivanoff, in Winterlight, 19th year. The last word is abraded but recoverable." He watched her, expression unreadable. "Write it." She did, first in Russian script, then transliterated, then translated. He compared her line to a reference volume, then closed the book with a soft snap. "Acceptable," he said. From anyone else it might have sounded meagre. From him it felt like being admitted through a door bolted for years. The day settled into work. Sandra catalogued every label and nail hole on the backboards from Whitcomb House. Under a strip of old paper she found a faint ink notation: Ravenhill Gallery, East Wall, number 17. In her father's hand. She knew the shape of his numeral 7 as she knew her own pulse. At luncheon she was seated at a side table with 2 junior clerks who addressed her only to ask for the salt. By tea a footman, accidentally, called her Miss Whitcomb and apologised with a smirk. She understood the game. No one knew what she was, therefore she could be made into whatever amused them. In late afternoon, Norwood returned with a stack of sale catalogues and set them beside her. "You said your father kept inventories," he said. "Yes." "Then you know this work. Cross-reference these with Whitcomb holdings from the same years. Flag anything that vanished between listing and sale." She looked up. "You think there were other undeclared removals?" "I think debt makes people creative. Sir Julian's debts." His gaze cooled a degree. "You need not persuade me Sir Julian is a fool. Numbers will do that without rhetoric." He turned to leave, then stopped. "And Miss Ivanoff, while you are in this house, you are under my protection as an employee. If anyone troubles you, report it through Mrs. Dalrymple." She should have said "thank you." Instead she said, "Protection can be withdrawn." He met her eyes. "So can cooperation. We are both taking risks." Then he was gone. By the 3rd day the risks had multiplied. A note arrived on heavy cream paper with Lady Whitcomb's seal broken and reclosed, as if read by more than one hand before reaching her. The message was brief: "Return immediately. Your absence is being remarked upon. Mr. Blaine dines Thursday to settle terms. Do not force me to take steps that will damage you." No signature, merely the crest. Sandra held the paper over the grate until flame blackened the edges and swallowed the words. That evening, whispers in the lower corridor turned loud enough to hear. "Says she cornered His Grace in front of everyone. Foreign bastard claims and forged portraits. If she lands him, I'll eat my hat." Sandra kept walking. In the reflection of a darkened window she saw Norwood at the far end of the passage, still as a carved figure, hearing every word. He said nothing to the men then, but by morning one had been reassigned to stables and the other was gone entirely. Work sharpened under pressure. In a crate false bottom she found 3 folded letters stuck together by damp. 2 were bills. The 3rd, in her father's hand, addressed to a solicitor named Pemberton, referred to the Ravenhill settlement promised in Elena's marriage portion and requested duplicates held at Norwood's chambers per witness requirement. The date was 6 months before his death. Sandra read it twice, then took it, pulse racing, to the Duke's study. He was standing at his desk, jacket off, sleeves immaculate despite the hour. A decanter sat untouched near his elbow. Behind him hung a small portrait turned toward the wall, its face hidden. She held out the letter. "This mentions duplicate settlement papers witnessed by your father." He read, jaw tightening slightly at the line naming his father. "Pemberton was attached to our legal office for a decade," he said. "Dead now." "Would duplicates still exist?" "If properly lodged, yes." Then Lady Whitcomb knew. She had to know. "Possibly. Probably." He set the letter down with care. "Probability is not evidence." She heard the old frustration in herself, the years of being told that what she knew in her bones did not count because she could not produce stamped parchment on command. "She has called me Charity since I was 17. His expression altered, not softer, but less distant. "I do not require your history to be painless, Miss Ivanoff. I require it to be provable." Before she could answer, a shout tore through the courtyard below. Both turned. Norwood crossed the room in 3 strides and yanked open the window. In the yard, lantern lights swung wildly over 2 men grappling by the service gate, while a third darted toward the coach house where the Whitcomb crates were stored. "Stay here!" Norwood snapped. Sandra was already moving. She hit the back stairs at a run, skirts clenched in one fist, the other hand catching the banister to keep from sliding. By the time she burst into the coach house, the would-be thief had wrenched open the portrait crate and was dragging canvas and frame toward the door. A young groom, Tom, red-haired 19, lunged to stop him and caught a glancing blow from an iron hook at the temple. He staggered down with a cry. "Leave it!" Sandra shouted. The man cursed, shoved the frame, and bolted through the side entrance as 2 grooms converged. Outside came the thud of pursuit, then silence broken by panting and a horse's shrill neigh. Sandra went straight to Tom. Blood ran from the cut at his temple, dark against straw. She ripped a strip from her undersleeve, pressed hard over the wound, and spoke low in Russian, first by reflex, her mother's soothing nonsense, and then in English when his eyes found hers. "Stay with me! Breathe! That's it!" Bootsteps slammed behind her. Norwood entered with his valet and 1 guard, took in the scene at a glance, and dropped to 1 knee opposite her without hesitation, his gloved hand steadying Tom's shoulder. "Doctor! Now!" he ordered the guard. The portrait lay skewed against a tack trunk, 1 corner scraped but not torn. Sandra's sleeve was slick to the elbow with blood. Some Tom's, some from splinters in her own palm, where she had caught the frame. She looked up at Norwood, anger and adrenaline burning through fear, and said the sentence that had been building for days. "If I am lying, Your Grace, let me be ruined publicly. If I am right, you are sheltering a fraud." He held her gaze for a long moment while Tom groaned between them. Then he rose. "Bring Miss Ivanoff to the West Archive," he said to his valet, "after the surgeon has seen Tom." To Sandra, more quietly, "Wash your hands. Keep the torn sleeve. It may be useful." Useful? Even blood could be evidence. The West Archive lay behind 2 locked doors and a corridor lined in iron-grilled cabinets. Norwood dismissed everyone but his solicitor, Mr. Hale, a lean man with ink-stained fingers and a face like folded parchment. "You will describe precisely what you seek," Hale said, already opening a ledger book. Sandra stood at the central table, hands newly bandaged where splinters had been pulled. Fatigue made the room seem overly bright. "Marriage settlement of Elena Ivanoff and Pavel Ivanoff," she said. "Any codicil referencing Ravenhill Trust. Possibly filed under Ivanoff, possibly under Whitcomb due to guardianship transfer after my father's death." Hale's brows rose at her clipped legal phrasing. He looked to Norwood, who gave a brief nod. "Search commences," the solicitor said. Hours passed in paper and dust. Bundles were brought, untied, rejected. Norwood worked beside them without ceremony, reading faster than either clerk, sorting by date and witness mark. He did not speak except to request another lamp. Near midnight, Sandra rubbed her aching eyes and reached for a thick account ledger from 1802, whose spine had been clumsily repaired with dark thread. As she lifted it, something in the binding caught light, a glint beneath cracked leather, not thread, a tiny metal clasp. "Wait!" she whispered. She fetched a thin blade from the conservation tray and slid it carefully under the loose edge of spine leather. The panel lifted. Inside, folded flat in a hidden pocket, lay a miniature portrait on ivory no larger than her palm, The same woman in silver satin, same storm grey eyes, painted from a slightly different angle, and on the reverse, in faded ink, E.I. Ravenhill. For a second Sandra could not move. Norwood took in a breath so slight she would have missed it if she had not been listening for any sign of him at all. Hale muttered, "Good God!" Behind the miniature was a folded legal document, wafer-sealed and brittle. Hale opened it with reverent care and read, lips moving once before he spoke aloud. Codicil to settlement, witnessed by Arthur, Duke of Norwood, dated January 14th. In the event of my death preceding that of my wife, Elena Ivanov, all income and beneficial title of the Ravenhill Trust shall pass to the issue of Eleanor Ivanov, surviving and lawful, independent of collateral claims. He looked up, eyes suddenly sharp. There is no ambiguity in this language. Sandra heard each word as if from the far end of a tunnel. Issue of Elena Ivanov, not dependent, not charity, not tolerated burden, named. Norwood extended his hand. She placed the miniature in it, watched his long fingers, so controlled in every other context, tighten once around the tiny oval before he set it gently back on the felt. "My father witnessed this," he said, voice low, "which means a certified duplicate should indeed have existed." "And vanished," Sandra said. "Suppressed," Hale corrected grimly. "If Whitcomb's household acted with knowledge, we are now in fraud and unlawful dispossession." The words should have felt triumphant. Instead, Sandra felt something inside her shift with almost painful force, like a bone set back into place after years crooked. The story she had been forced to live, grateful dependent, plain burden, girl with no claim, had not merely been untrained, it had been constructed. Norwood studied her face, and this time he did not hide that he saw more than usefulness. "You understand what follows," he said. "Petitions, affidavits, public scrutiny. Lady Whitcomb will not yield quietly." Sandra thought of the blue sitting room, of Mr. Blaine's damp hand, of Tom bleeding in straw because someone wanted a painting stolen before dawn. She thought of girls who had less education than she did, less luck, no Duke's archive to open. "I do," she said. "If you prefer," he went on, measured, "we can settle privately. Secure your income, avoid spectacle." The offer was not cowardice, it was consideration, and perhaps his own instinct for containment. She understood that too. She straightened, bandaged hands flat on the table beside the codicil. "I prefer truth," she said, "and enough independence that no woman in my position must barter safety for bread." Silence held for a beat. Then Hale gave a short, almost startled nod, as if recording not just testimony but character. Norwood's answer was equally quiet. "Very well, then we proceed in full." Outside, somewhere deep in the house, the clock struck 1. In the archive's circle of lamplight, mother and daughter looked out from 2 portraits at last joined, and history, inked, hidden, denied, had begun to turn. "Very well, then we proceed in full." Hale did not wait for dawn. He sanded fresh pages, drew up sworn statements by lamplight, and sent a rider before 2 o'clock to wake a chancery clerk who owed Norwood 3 favours and feared him enough to answer the door in shirt-sleeves. Sandra copied the Russian inscription twice more in a steadier hand, signed her name beneath the translations, and watched Hale seal each page with dark red wax. By 4, exhaustion had made everything unnaturally precise. The scrape of quills, the hiss of coal, the way Norwood's signet pressed clean into wax with no tremor at all. At 6, retaliation arrived. A footman entered the archive with a silver tray and 3 notes. The first was for Norwood, delivered by a Whitcomb groom who had ridden hard enough to lather his horse. The second was for Hale, from a barrister in Lincoln's Inn. The third, unaddressed but folded around a printed handbill, had been pushed under Norwood House's service gate. Norwood broke his first and read in silence. His mouth flattened. "Hale," he said, passing it over. "Read." Hale's eyes moved quickly. "She alleges," he said, voice clipped, "that Miss Ivanoff was removed from her lawful guardian by coercion, that the portrait and all associated papers were obtained under false pretences, that she intends civil action for theft, defamation, and interference." Sandra went cold. "Lawful guardian? I am of age." "Facts do not prevent filings," Hale said. "They merely defeat them eventually." The handbill crackled in Sandra's fingers as she opened it. Cheap ink. No printer's mark. The headline screamed, "Foreign Adventuress at Norwood House." A dangerous imposture below. In breathless prose, she was described as a charity dependent of uncertain birth, attempting to ensnare rank through fabricated continental relics. There was even a line about theatrical displays of blood and tears in stables, as if Tom's injury had been staged for effect. Norwood took the sheet from her and fed it to the fire without comment. By breakfast the campaign had spread. 2 servants requested references in case the house became unpleasantly public. A messenger delivered a calling card from Mr. Blaine with a penciled line on the back. "A private understanding remains binding despite current excitements." Hale snorted aloud when he read it, and then, grimly practical, added the card to the growing stack of evidence. At 10, Mrs. Dalrymple entered with unusual haste. "Beg pardon, Your Grace. A woman at the tradesman's door insists she must see Miss Ivanoff. Says her name is Greeley." Sandra was in the corridor before anyone could stop her. Mrs. Greeley stood in a wet cloak, bonnet askew, face mottled with cold and anger. She gripped a carpet bag so tightly her knuckles shone white. "They've put me out," she said without preamble. "Dismissed at 8, no character, 40 years and no character." Her voice cracked once, then hardened. "I took what I could before her ladyship's man locked the room." From the bag she drew a packet tied in kitchen twine, 2 household inventory pages in Sandra's father's hand, 1 torn letter fragment with Elena's signature, and a page ripped from an old account book listing annual disbursements from Ravenhill Trust through the year of Pavel Ivanov's death, then abruptly struck through. Sandra touched the paper as if it might vanish. "You saved these." "I hid them in flower bins the year your father died," Mrs. Greeley said, "because I've seen widows robbed politely before." Norwood, who had followed into the hall, bowed slightly to the older woman, as if she were a duchess. "Mrs. Greeley, your courage may prove decisive," she sniffed. "Courage, my eye, spite and memory, more like." Yet, even as relief flared, the stakes sharpened. Lady Whitcomb was no longer merely denying the truth in private rooms. She was litigating, printing lies, dismissing witnesses, and moving faster than reputation should permit. If she succeeded, Sandra would not only lose Ravenhill, she would be fixed in public record as a fraud. No school, no stipend, no independence, no future not purchased by some man's terms. And Norwood, by sheltering her, would be named conspirator. By noon, Hale had assembled what he called, with tight confidence, a chain strong enough to hold if placed before the right judge quickly. The codicil and miniature, wrapped in oiled silk, were set in a locked dispatch box with 2 affidavits and Mrs. Greeley's recovered pages. Hale himself would carry the box to Chambers for immediate certification and filing. Delay, he said, was now their enemy. "I should go," Sandra said. "No," Hale and Norwood said together. Hale added, "If Whitcomb means to create spectacle, she will prefer you visible and disreputable, not absent and documented. You stay out of reach until we file." Norwood called for his closed carriage, 2 mounted guards, and a second decoy coach, leaving 5 minutes earlier by the Strand route. For 1 hour it seemed caution might outpace malice. Then, at 1:30, a groom came pounding into the front hall, breathless, hatless, mud to his knees. "Ambush on Chancery Lane," he gasped. "Mister!" Hale's carriage wheel was taken clean off by a cart that came at speed. Deliberate, looked like. Horses panicked. Mr. Hale struck his head. Men in work coats swarmed the wreck like they were helping, then bolted. Dispatch box gone. The world narrowed to a ringing hush. Sandra reached for the newel post and missed, catching herself on air. "Where is Mr. Hale?" Norwood demanded. "At Mr. Finch's surgery. Conscious, sir, but bleeding." Norwood was already moving. "Dr. Lytton to Finch's. Send word to Bow Street and my own man at once. Lock every gate. No paper leaves this house without my seal." He turned back to Sandra only once, and for the first time she saw not composure but fury held on a knife edge. "Stay here." "I am coming." "No. My evidence has just been stolen in daylight because it concerns me." "Speak." Then, jaw set, he gave one curt nod. "Carriage, now." Finch's surgery smelled of vinegar and iron. Hale lay propped on a narrow cot, one temple bandaged, spectacles bent. He looked offended by his own injury. "Do not stand there like mourners," he snapped when they entered. "I am not dead, only concussed." "Can you identify them?" Norwood asked. "Two at the wheel cart, one with a scar at left jaw, one missing front teeth. Fourth man lifted the dispatch box. Knew exactly what he wanted." Hale closed his eyes briefly. "I kept my hand on it until someone drove a knee into my wrist." Sandra looked down. His right hand was already swelling, fingers purpled. "Were any documents dropped?" she asked. "One affidavit blew under the axle and was crushed to pulp." He gave a humourless smile. "I regret the penmanship lost." "Did you make copies?" Norwood asked. "Draft notes only. Unsworn. Unsealed." Hale opened his eyes again, steady despite pain. "Without original codicil, Whitcomb will call this invention. We can still proceed, but our footing is mud." There it was. The failure, blunt and irreparable. Not a delayed dinner, not a bruised pride. Evidence gone, legal force thinned, momentum bleeding out in a surgeon's back room. Bow Street officers took statements. One asked Sandra, too casually, whether she had many enemies among her own class. Another suggested highway opportunism until Norwood's stare made him revise to possibly targeted theft. By the time they returned to Norwood House, dusk had thickened and the first rain had begun. In the east workroom, the portrait stood where they had left it, Elena's painted eyes unchanged, as if nothing human could be trusted to keep pace with what canvas remembered. Sandra stood before it until the room blurred. For the first time since speaking in the gallery at Whitcomb, doubt got through the armour. Not doubt in truth, doubt in victory. She had pulled years of buried fact into light, and light had answered with pamphlets, dismissals, hired thieves, and a stolen box that might never be recovered. Lady Whitcomb had money, habit, and the county's appetite for an ungrateful girl story. Sandra had ink fragments and a bruised solicitor. When she finally sat, it was not graceful. She folded forward, elbows on knees, palms over her eyes, and let herself shake exactly once before stillness returned. Norwood did not go to dinner. He shut himself in the room at the end of the west corridor that no one entered without invitation, the room with the covered portrait over the mantel and the escritoire untouched since the second winter of his marriage. Rain tapped the panes in patient intervals. He poured brandy and did not drink it. Control had always been his discipline, then his refuge, then, after Marianne died, his only absolution. Keep accounts exact, keep collections authenticated, keep grief curated into private hours no one could witness, because witness invited pity, and pity was intolerable. He had failed at control once in the only place that mattered. Marianne had fallen ill in February, fever rising while Parliament argued tariffs he could no longer recall. He had received the first note and stayed an extra day because leaving early would have triggered comment about ducal panic. By the time he rode through sleet to Norwood House, she no longer knew him between lucid moments. She died 3 mornings later with his hand in hers, and apology lodged uselessly in his throat. Since then, he had trusted procedure more than people, and despised himself a little for both. Now he had told a young woman to trust his protection, and by afternoon the core of her case had been stolen between his carriage wheels and his legal chambers. A knock sounded, not a servant's. 2 measured taps. "Come!" Sandra entered, face pale with fatigue, hair loosened at the temples, bandage peaking at one wrist where splinters had torn skin. She did not sit. "I was told you had not eaten," she said. "Neither have you." "That is not an answer." Something in him almost laughed. It came out as a rough exhale instead. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. She remained standing until he sat first, then took the edge of the chair, as if ready to rise and fight. "I failed you today," he said, her head lifted sharply. "You did not hire the men." "I gave Hale a target and routine route despite knowing Whitcomb had become desperate." "You gave him guards and a decoy." "Not enough." Silence stretched, rain thickened. When he spoke again, the words came less cleanly than any he had offered her before. "I'm accustomed to systems obeying me, if designed correctly. It is an arrogance I call diligence. Sometimes it's only fear in better tailoring." She watched him, very still. "My wife died while I was being reasonable," he said. Saying it aloud was like stepping without rail into dark water. "Since then, I have mistaken composure for prevention. You asked for truth. I can promise effort and risk. I cannot promise no further loss." Sandra's throat moved once before she answered. "I am not asking you to be invulnerable, Your Grace." "Gabriel," he said, then seemed surprised at himself. She blinked. "Gabriel." "Not in court," he said dryly. "I have limits." A ghost of a smile touched her mouth and vanished. "Then hear mine. If this collapses, I will endure it standing, but I will not return to being managed into gratitude, not by Lady Whitcomb, not by pity, not even by you." He inclined his head. "Agreed." For the first time all day, his chest eased, not with optimism, but with the steadier relief of terms honestly made. The final move came before dawn. A sealed envelope arrived by private rider, addressed to Sandra in Lady Whitcomb's unmistakable hand. Hale, pale and bandaged, but back on his feet by stubbornness alone, insisted she open it in his presence. Inside was an engraved invitation. "Lady Whitcomb requests the honour of your attendance at a music hall on Thursday evening, 8 o'clock, to witness the public correction of malicious falsehoods concerning the so-called Ivanov portrait." Below, in ink added by hand, "Bring whatever evidence remains to you. I shall bring mine. Mr. Blaine and all interested parties will be present. If you fail to appear, your silence will be taken as confession." A second enclosure, folded smaller, bore no crest. It was from Mrs. Greeley, hurried and blotted. "Miss S., they mean to show a paper from Parish Register saying you are not Elena's child. I saw Julian pay the curate's nephew 2 nights since. Also heard her ladyship say she'll end the business at the hearth if pressed. Keep the portrait away from her fire if you value it." Hale swore softly. "She intends to try the case in a drawing room before we reach a judge. If she controls the audience, she controls the first story." Norwood read both notes, expression hardening line by line. "Then we do not give her uncontested theatre." Hale lifted his injured hand. Our original codicil is gone. We have your sworn memory of its text. Memory is not deed parchment. No, Norwood said, but witnesses are. Sandra looked between them. Who? Norwood turned to Hale. Wake every surviving clerk who served under Pemberton. Find the one who copied marriage settlements in 1802. I want him in that room Thursday, even if we carry him in blankets. Hale nodded once and winced at the motion. Sandra read Lady Whitcomb's inked challenge again, hearing beneath it the same old command. Be silent. Be grateful. Be erased. Only now the command had an audience and a fireplace waiting. If we refuse, she brands me fraud by default, Sandra said. If we attend without proof, she brands me fraud to my face. And if we attend prepared, Norwood said, she overreaches in public. Prepared, with stolen originals, forged parish pages likely waiting, and a room full of creditors eager for scandal. Rain rattled the windows as if applauding bad odds. Sandra folded the invitation with precise fingers and set it on the table between them. Then we attend, she said, and we do not let her near the hearth. Then we attend, she said, and we do not let her near the hearth. Lady Whitcomb's musicale glittered as if scandal were another decorative scheme. Candles blazed in mirrored sconces. A quartet played near the far windows, bows moving with nervous precision while conversation rose and dropped in pockets. Solicitors in sober black, creditors with heavy watch chains, neighbouring ladies pretending they had come only for Schubert and syllabub. At the centre of it all stood Lady Whitcomb in amethyst silk, smile sharpened for battle. Sandra entered on Norwood's arm and felt the room tilt toward them like iron to a magnet. She wore plain black with no ornament except clean cuffs and bandaged palms hidden beneath pale gloves. She had chosen severity on purpose. Let no one say she came dressed for conquest. Norwood left her side after 3 measured steps, exactly as agreed. Present, visible, not shielding. Lady Whitcomb advanced, voice bright enough to carry. My dear Sandra, how brave of you to appear. I had feared your friends would advise retreat. They advise preparation, Sandra said, a flicker in Lady Whitcomb's eyes. Of course. Near the fireplace, on an easel draped in green baize, stood Elena's portrait. Too close to the flames, Sandra marked the distance automatically. 6 feet, perhaps less. Mrs. Greeley's warning burned in her mind. Mr. Blaine materialized from the crowd with oily eagerness. Miss Ivanov, distressing misunderstandings aside, we may still speak privately. A woman's reputation is best repaired under a husband's name. No, Sandra said clearly, and looked past him to Lady Whitcomb. Shall we begin? Lady Whitcomb raised her hand for quiet, and the quartet faltered into silence. My friends, she said, turning to her audience, I regret that this evening has been polluted by vulgar allegations against my family. In mercy to all concerned, I mean to end them, she gestured. A footman brought forward a folded paper. Here is parish record proving this young woman is not the lawful child of Elena Ivanov, and therefore has no claim whatsoever to Ravenhill or any related trust. A murmur ran through the room. Lady Whitcomb continued, The so-called codicil has not been produced in any court because it does not exist. The portrait in question is a damaged foreign imitation. I have tolerated insolence long enough. She turned, swift as a striking bird, seized the portrait's frame with both hands, and swung it toward the hearth. Sandra moved before thought. She crossed the carpet in 2 strides, caught the frame's lower rail, and dragged it hard away from flame. Heat licked her gloves, one split at the seam. Pain shot across her palm, where a hidden splinter bit skin. Lady Whitcomb hissed and held on. For one suspended second they grappled with Elena's painted face between them, while half the county watched. "Release it!" Lady Whitcomb said through her teeth. Sandra wrenched once, cleanly. The older woman lost her grip and stumbled back into Sir Julian, who cursed and slopped brandy onto his cuff. Sandra set the portrait up right against the marble and turned to the room, breathing hard but steady. "If this is worthless," she said, voice carrying without shout, "why try to burn it?" No one answered. She stripped off her torn glove, revealing reddened skin, and nodded to Hale, who stepped forward from the second row, with a locked leather case under his arm and a bandage still visible at his temple. "Since her ladyship has invited public correction," Sandra said, "let us proceed with documents, not declarations." Hale opened the case and withdrew 3 items, a sealed exemplification, a folded translation in Sandra's hand, and a smaller docket book worn at the edges. "First," Sandra said, lifting the translation, "the inscription on this frame in Russian reads, 'Elena Ivanov, in Winterlight, 19th year.' I translated it in Norwood's archive in the presence of His Grace, Mr. Hale, and Conservator Dr. Ames." A spare man with ink-dark sleeves stepped forward and bowed. "I examined the inscription under magnification," Dr. Ames said. "The lettering sits beneath original varnish layers. It is not recent." Lady Whitcomb gave a brittle laugh. "A paid expert can be found for anything." "Then here an unpaid one," Sandra replied, and took the docket book from Hale. "Mr. Fenwick." An elderly clerk, shoulders bent but eyes sharp, came from near the doorway leaning on a cane. His cuffs were frayed, his voice was not. "I copied settlements in Pemberton's office for 32 years, he said. "This docket is mine. Entry 14th of January, year as stated. Codicil to Elena Ivanov marriage settlement, witnessed by Arthur, Duke of Norwood. I wrote the office abstract and indexed duplicate lodgment. Miss Ivanov's name appears as surviving issue." He tapped the page with one finger. "That is my hand, witnessed then by 2 apprentices, now dead and 1 alive. Affidavit filed this afternoon." Hale raised the sealed exemplification. "And this, obtained today from registry copy tied to that index, bears court seal and certified text." He handed it to Sandra. She faced the crowd, unfolded the stiff paper, and read the crucial line aloud, each word distinct. "All income and beneficial title of the Ravenhill Trust shall pass to the issue of Elena Ivanov, surviving and lawful, independent of collateral claims." Silence fell so hard the fire's crackle sounded indecently loud. Lady Whitcomb's fan snapped shut. "Forgery!" Sandra turned to her. "Then challenge the seal in Chancery tomorrow." Blaine lunged verbally where courage was cheapest. "Even if such a paper exists, there was an understanding—" "With you!" Sandra cut in, looking at him for the first time as if he were an account entry to be struck through. "I am 22 years of age. I entered no engagement, signed no promise, and I refuse you publicly before witnesses." A rustle, half scandal, half satisfaction. Blaine flushed mottled red. "You are an ungrateful—" "I am legally competent," Sandra said, "and not for sale." She turned back to the room. "Mr. Hale, please note my instruction. File immediate injunctions against further sale or encumbrance of Ravenhill assets, pending final decree." Hale bowed slightly. "Already drafted, Miss Ivanov. To be lodged before midnight." Now Norwood moved, but only to stand 1 pace behind Sandra's right shoulder, silent, unmistakably aligned. Lady Whitcomb saw it and, for the first time all evening, misjudged her audience. She stepped forward, voice rising. "Do not be duped by theatrics. She came into my house with nothing. I clothed her, fed her." "You erased her," Mrs. Greeley said from the back, louder than anyone expected. Heads turned as the dismissed housekeeper pushed through rows of chairs. "You burned letters in the still room grate yourself, told me to strike Ravenhill from the quarterly books. I did not." She held up a folded ledger page. "Original disbursements, your ladyship, in your steward's column and mine." Lady Whitcomb's composure cracked. "You thieving old woman. I kept what you meant to destroy." Sir Julian swore and started toward Mrs. Greeley, but Tom, the stable boy, temple scar healing purple, stepped into his path with 2 grooms at either shoulder. "Wouldn't, sir," Tom said quietly. The room had changed sides without announcing it. Lady Whitcomb did not collapse. She fought. "Constable!" she called sharply toward the hall. "Arrest that woman for theft! Arrest Miss Ivanoff for criminal deception and abduction from guardianship." A constable did appear, then halted, uncertain, as 2 legal gentlemen spoke in his ear at once. Hale produced documents. Lady Whitcomb thrust forth her parish paper with a shaking hand. "Yes, read that," she demanded. "Read the register." The constable passed it to a bespectacled vicar from the second row, who adjusted the page toward candlelight. Before he could speak, Sandra held out her hand. "May I?" Lady Whitcomb sneered. "By all means. Add perjury to your evening." Sandra took the paper and let her training settle her heartbeat. Accounts first, then anomalies. Ink, hand, dates, seals. She looked up. "This is meant to be from St. Jude's parish register." "It is," Lady Whitcomb said. Sandra turned the sheet toward the nearest cluster of solicitors. "Then why is the date written in numerals not adopted in that register until 12 years later? Why is the curate's signature E. Markham when Edmund Markham signed as Edmund in every surviving page? And why is the paper watermarked with a mill stamp founded after the year on its face?" A murmur surged. One solicitor leaned forward. "Good God, she's right about the watermark!" Sandra wasn't done. She touched one line with her fingertip. "Also, this entry gives my mother's name as Helena. She never used that spelling in English or Russian. Never." Lady Whitcomb's jaw worked. "You expect us to believe your memory over church record?" "No," Sandra said. "I expect you to believe evidence over forgery." Blaine, sensing collapse, tried another angle. Character, then. She has no character references. None. "I do," Sandra said, and turned slightly. "Mrs. Dalrymple." Norwood's housekeeper stepped forward from near the pianoforte, expression carved from granite. "Miss Ivanoff has served at Norwood House under my supervision. Her conduct has been exact. If your concern is impropriety, Mr. Blaine, begin with your own correspondence." Hale held up Blaine's penciled card between 2 fingers as if it smelled bad. Laughter, quickly suppressed, flickered at the edges of the room. Lady Whitcomb made one final desperate pivot. "Even if the trust passes, management remains with family trustees. I am family." "Collateral family," Hale said. "Codicil excludes collateral claims." "Then I challenge competency. She is unstable. Look at her. Blood, fire, scenes." Sandra stepped forward into the centre of the carpet where everyone could see her face. "You called me plain to make me small," she said to Lady Whitcomb, voice low but carrying. "You called me dependent to make me obedient. You called me ungrateful so no one would ask what, exactly, I was meant to thank you for." No one moved. "I thank you tonight for one thing only, choosing a public room. You taught me silence as survival. I am done surviving that way." She turned to the constable. "Sir, I request this forged parish document be taken into custody tonight, along with witness statements from Mr. Fenwick, Dr. Ames, Mrs. Greeley and Mr. Hale regarding attempted theft of legal papers." The constable straightened, finding footing in procedure. "Yes, miss." "And I request," she said, looking now at the 2 Chancery solicitors nearest the fireplace, "that you witness my instruction for immediate protective injunction over Ravenhill and associated holdings to prevent further destruction of evidence." Both men bowed. "Witnessed." Lady Whitcomb looked from face to face and found no rescue. For a moment Sandra thought the older woman might scream. Instead, she seemed to shrink within her silk, as if boning had been removed from a gown. Her fan dropped to the carpet. Sir Julian stooped to retrieve it. She did not take it. "This house," she said hoarsely, not quite to Sandra, not quite to anyone, "was kept from ruin." "By ruining someone else," Sandra answered. Lady Whitcomb sank into a chair by the untouched pianoforte and stared at the fire she had failed to use. She said nothing more. When the last guest had gone and the quartet packed away their instruments in shaken silence, Sandra stood in the empty drawing-room with her hands wrapped in cool linen and felt the aftershock arrive. Not triumph, not yet. Her body seemed suddenly borrowed, legs unsteady, throat raw, fingers throbbing where heat had seared through kid leather. The portrait leaned safely against the wall, watched now by 2 Norwood footmen and 1 constable. Eleanor's painted gaze looked calm, almost amused, as if daughters had always pulled mothers from fire and not the reverse. Hale approached, pale but alight with professional ferocity. "Injunction filed," he said. "Accepted under emergency seal. Whitcomb cannot sell a frame nail now without court notice." Sandra nodded once, then swayed. Norwood was there before she fell, not dramatic, simply exact. Hand at her elbow, then both hands, as she steadied. "You are done for tonight." "I still need to sign." "You have signed." He guided her toward a smaller side room where supper trays had gone untouched. "Sit." She sat because resisting cost more than obedience in that moment. Mrs. Greeley appeared with a basin and clean cloth, as if she had always belonged in Norwood's logistics. "Let me see those hands, lamb." "I am not a lamb," Sandra muttered. "No, you are a terrier." "Hold still." As cool water touched burnt skin, Sandra hissed and then laughed once, breathless at the absurdity of laughing at all. Tom hovered in the doorway, cap crushed between his fingers. "Miss Ivanov," he said, voice cracking, "I told the constable about the man with the scar. The same one as the coach house." "Well done," she said. "Go sleep before you fall over." "Yes, miss." Norwood leaned against the mantel, jacket unbuttoned for the first time she had ever seen. Watching everyone with that same contained intensity he brought to archives and crises alike. But when their eyes met, the containment slipped a fraction, and she saw relief so stark it was almost tenderness. By dawn, printed broadsides had begun to shift tone. One described disturbing allegations against Lady Whitcomb. Another, less subtle, called the evening a disastrous overreach in which Miss Ivanov spoke with remarkable composure. Reputation had not cleared. It had cracked open. 2 days later, Chancery chambers smelled of damp wool and sealing wax. Sandra stood before the bench while clerks shuffled bundles, and a judge peered over half-moon spectacles at the codicil text, the docket entries, the affidavits, and the seized forged parish page now tagged as evidence. "Pending full proceedings," the judge said, "interim control of Ravenhill Trust income is granted to Miss Sandra Ivanov, sole presumptive beneficiary under produced codicil terms. Lady Whitcomb's management authority is suspended." The gavel struck. Short sound, years moving. Outside on the stone steps, rain threatened but did not fall. Hale exhaled like a man who had held his breath for a month. "That," he said, "is not final decree, but it is the hinge." Sandra closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you." "Thank me when I send my bill," he said, then softened. "And Miss Ivanoff, you argued your own facts better than half my clients with titles." She almost answered with habit, self-effacement, gratitude shaped like apology. Instead, she said, "I intend to keep doing so." Norwood offered her his arm for the carriage. This time, when she took it, she did not feel borrowed. The final decree came in spring, under a sky the colour of polished pewter. Ravenhill's old steward, summoned by court order and confronted with ledgers he had thought destroyed, testified for 3 blunt hours. The Chancery examiner was patient. The numbers were not. Transfers had been rerouted, entries struck and rewritten, allowances inflated for household contingencies that turned out to be Sir Julian's notes and Blaine's quiet settlements. Lady Whitcomb's counsel tried to muddy lineage, competency, intent. Sandra answered each question herself when permitted, with dates and references precise enough to make obfuscation look childish. By afternoon, judgment was plain before spoken: recognition of beneficiary, restoration of misappropriated income. Lady Whitcomb retained a reduced jointure only. Sir Julian's creditors to petition against his separate obligations without touching Ravenhill principal. Mr. Blaine's claim of marital understanding dismissed with visible judicial irritation. In the corridor afterward, Lady Whitcomb paused across from Sandra for the first time since the musicale. No audience now, no quartet, no chandelier, no fan to snap. "You could have settled quietly," she said. Her voice sounded older than her face. "You chose to expose us." "You exposed yourself," Sandra replied. "I chose to stop helping." A muscle jumped in Lady Whitcomb's cheek. "Do you think this victory makes you one of them?" Sandra glanced toward the courtroom doors, where barristers and clerks moved with indifferent urgency. "No," she said. "It makes me myself." Lady Whitcomb looked as if she had more to say, and found no purchase. She turned away, Sir Julian trailing after with the stunned gait of men who have discovered consequences are not rumour. When Sandra reached the carriage yard, Norwood was waiting beside a dark town coach, hat in hand, despite a chill wind. He searched her face, saw the answer, and closed his eyes once, as if in thanks. "It is done?" he asked. "It is done?" He let out a breath that might once have been a laugh, and then, unexpectedly, cupped her face with both hands, careful of healing skin, not caring who in the yard could see. "Come home," he said softly, and then seemed to catch himself. "To Norwood House, I mean." She touched his wrist. "I know what you meant." 3 weeks later, Ravenhill's account room smelled of dust, ink, and fresh paint where old damp had been scraped away. Sandra stood at the broad ledger table with sleeves pinned above her wrists, now healed to thin pink lines, and sorted columns with the ferocious pleasure of rightful work. She had insisted on this before anything else. Accounts first, appointments second, emotions last. A new steward hired on merit. Quarterly reporting in duplicate. A legal trust instrument amended so no future beneficiary could be declared incompetent without court physician and independent counsel. A small line item she added herself: emergency stipends for dismissed governesses and housekeepers without references, initial fund already transferred. Mrs. Greeley, newly installed as superintendent of the stipend office, and loudly pretending not to enjoy authority, stood at the door with 2 letters. "One from the schoolmaster's widow," she said. "One from a girl in Exeter cast out by her employers. She writes a neat hand." "Bring both," Sandra said, "and tea, if you're feeling saintly." Never that. But Mrs. Greeley smiled. When the room emptied again, Norwood appeared in the threshold, not announced, coat unbuttoned from riding. He took in the ledgers, the ink on her fingers, the stack of signed directives. "I was told," he said, "that if I interrupted before luncheon, I would be billed consulting rates. You were told correctly. Then I come prepared." He set a folder on the table. "Draft marriage articles." Sandra stilled. He did not move closer yet. "You said you would never surrender legal authority again. These provide separate property, independent signature on Ravenhill disbursements, and explicit protection of your stipend fund from marital consolidation. Hale called them unromantic and ironclad. I took it as praise." She opened the folder. The clauses were exact. Her name, not subsumed. Her rights, not implied. She read 2 pages before looking up. "Gabriel!" He crossed to the other side of the table, palms flat on polished wood, as if approaching a skittish horse. "I have loved you for some time," he said, and the directness of it struck harder than any practiced declaration could have. "Not because you needed rescue. You never did. I love the way your mind refuses fog. I love that you stood in fire rather than let truth burn. I love that you terrify complacent men and restore abandoned women in the same afternoon." His mouth curved briefly, unsteady. "I am 40 and have lived as if control could substitute for courage. You have made that impossible." Sandra's eyes stung. She did not look away. "I'm afraid of needing anyone," she said quietly. "Need has been used against me." "I know. I'm afraid of vanishing inside someone else's title." "Then do not." He took a breath. "Marry me and remain yourself. Keep Ravenhill under your hand. Challenge me when I am wrong. Refuse me when necessary." "I am not asking for obedience. I am asking for partnership. And, if you can bear it, love." She laughed once through tears she had not granted anyone in years. That was almost poetry. "Do not spread it about." She came around the table and stood close enough to see the faint scar at his jaw from boyhood fencing, the silver beginning at his temples, the vulnerable hope he could not quite hide now that he had said everything. "I love you too," she said. "Not for rank, for honesty, for standing beside me and not in front of me." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them bright and unguarded. "Will you marry me, Sandra Ivanov?" "Yes." He kissed her then, careful first, asking, then certain when she answered him with both hands at his coat, ink and all. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "One condition more," she murmured. He made a face of mock resignation. "Naturally. If I am ever reduced to a decorative chair at my own table, I shall overturn it." He huffed a real laugh. "I would pay to see it." She held up the folder. "Then sign these, Your Grace." "At once, Mrs. Future Trouble." The schoolhouse roof at Ravenhill leaked in 3 places and smelled of chalk, damp wool, and boiled turnips from the adjoining kitchen. Sandra stood in the aisle between rough benches, while 12 children recited geography with varying commitment, and one small boy hid a frog in his cap. "Miss Ivanov, beg pardon, Your Grace," the new schoolmistress corrected herself for the 3rd time that morning, flushed and earnest. "We are grateful for the slates." "Sandra, when we are here," Sandra said, "and if the frog escapes again, I am promoting its owner to latrine duty." Giggles. Confession immediate. Outside, 2 women waited under the eaves. Hats pinched by weather and worry. Cast-off governesses from different counties, each clutching references so thin they might as well have been apologies. Mrs. Greeley met them with forms, tea and instructions that sounded like military orders softened by biscuits. "At Norwood House," Mrs. Greeley muttered later as they crossed the yard, "they still call me formidable." "They are correct," Sandra said. In London, Lady Whitcomb departed for Bath in a smaller carriage than she had once considered decent, her reduced jointure sufficient for comfort, but not command. Sir Julian sold his hunters and disappeared to the Continent, under creditor pressure. Mr. Blaine, challenged in open court on forged correspondence and attempted coercion, found invitations drying up faster than his credit. Summer brought Sandra's wedding to Norwood in the chapel he had avoided since Marianne's funeral. It was small by ducal standards and scandalously simple by Lady Whitcomb's. Hale attended with a new pair of spectacles and cried discreetly behind them during the vows, denying it afterward with legal indignation. Tom served as the second groom and stood straighter than any guardsman when he handed Sandra into the carriage. On an autumn evening, months later, Sandra walked the long gallery at Norwood House, where the restored portrait now hung between two landscapes, relined, cleaned, and properly titled Elena Ivanov, in winter light, age 19. Below it, a smaller frame held the miniature once hidden in Ledger's spine. The floor beneath her feet shone, but not because she had knelt there before dawn with a raw brush and bleeding hands. A maid passed carrying fresh flowers and nodded without fear. From the schoolroom wing came the sound of a child laughing. Her ward niece from Ravenhill, here for the term, unafraid of being too loud in a great house. Gabriel joined her quietly, stopping at her shoulder. "She has your eyes when you're angry," he said of the portrait. Sandra tilted her head. "I had thought they were my mother's." "Both can be true." She slipped her hand into his. In the glass over Eleanor's frame, reflections layered. Mother in silver satin, daughter in dark silk, Duke beside her, all held in one plane the house could no longer deny. At the opening of her old life, she had watched herself in fractured boards while scrubbing mud that was never hers. Now she stood upright in her own gallery, ink on her fingers, heat in her healed palms, history named aloud. The women in the portrait were no longer strangers,